Okay, so today I want to talk about the book that is coming out. The official release date is October 30th. Although I've already seen that some people who pre-ordered are already getting the book. And this is a project that definitely has taken over a big part of my life in the last few years. So I'm excited to share about it and talk about it. So you see here is this is the cover of the book, and we talk about all the data that we have gathered, so that the three of us who wrote this book together. And we're using this idea or metaphor of linguistic patterns of belief that we borrow from Sean Carroll, who is a physicist, and he wrote a book called The Big Picture, where he talks about the origins of the universe and whatnot. But one of the chapters, he introduces this idea of planets of beliefs. And he doesn't specifically talk about language. He talks about all of the beliefs that we have about life and how they are kind of like particles being stuck together to create those planets that then we kind of carry in us to deal with the world. And we've adapted this metaphor to not only beliefs that we have about the world, but also about language and the speakers that use it. That's where kind of the idea came from, and the title where it came from. So how this book came about? Well, first of all, I think the first time that I thought about of anything in the form of a book and talked about it for a minute was I did a research talk just like this one. I believe in 2015, when I was showing the data that I kind of freshly collected and was trying to analyze it, and there were some things that I didn't know yet quite how to understand and whatnot. And during the Q&A afterwards, I think it was Scott Stenson who asked me, okay, so now you have it, what are you going to do with it, right? What's the next step? And kind of jokingly, but kind of not, I just said to him, well, you're going to have to wait for the book about it. So now, 5 years later, here we are. It only took me 5 years to get here. But the first encounter between me and one of my co-authors was during SEQUEL, which is Southeastern Conference on Linguistics in 2016, which is a regional linguistic conference. Jennifer Kramer from University of Kentucky and me, we were in the same panel. We do a similar research, but her data is based in Kentucky, mine is based in Tennessee. And after the panel, we were just sitting there talking, and I don't remember anymore which one of us said that, but one of us said that, well, we should just write a book about it. And that just kind of stayed on in my mind until that summer when I encountered the book by Sean Carroll, and I was like, oh, I have an idea of how maybe we can connect all of the data and propose this metaphor. So during the summer of 2016, I contacted Jennifer and I was like, well, do you still want to do this book? And she was like, yeah. But we thought that we need one more representation of the South, because we were all interested in talking about the South, because we had Tennessee data, Kentucky data, and we thought of Susan Tomasi, who is at Emory, but she's also a former graduate from UGA, just like I was. So I knew her from that time a little bit. And Susan worked on data in Georgia. So we were like, this is probably a very good trio for us to work. And we asked her she wanted to do this. So we started working on this, on kind of talking through and trying to figure out how we're going to go about it. And we wanted to talk to our community of linguists, and especially those who deal with perceptions and attitudes about language like we do, to see if that metaphor and to see if that idea is viable and interesting to them. So we took our idea to a conference, DIVAR or Diver, we're still kind of arguing how to pronounce that, which was on diversity and variation in language in February of 2017. And we had like a 3 hour long panel with us presenting data, and then a group discussion with a lot of people in our linguistic community, led by Dennis Preston, who is kind of the guru for the perceptual dialectology that we do. So we wanted to get their feedback. The feedback was positive, but they've also asked us 20 million questions that we didn't really thought about before, which was great, because then we spend the time to actually thinking about it. And then we did a similar thing at the Linguistic Society of America Institute in the summer of 2017, where we presented some of the data and ideas that we have, and we kind of got feedback from our community. When that happened, when we got like those two kind of instances where we listened to other voices, this is where we started working on the book proposal, and that was in the fall of 2017. That book proposal was a very bizarre type of a thing to write, in a sense that we were imagining how our book will look like, but we had to make it in our writing as something that's concrete and it's almost basically there. So that led to a lot of discussions, a lot of revisions on that, and we sent it to Routledge because both Jennifer and Susan published before with Routledge, and they had the first refusal right. So they had to send the Routledge first, allow them to refuse before we go shop around somewhere else. And we were fully expecting that the kind of shopping around will take us a good year or more and whatnot. But to our surprise, Routledge, after about a week, responded to us like, "Yep, we're interested. We want to do this." So that's where kind of the process for us looked like. And then we did one more time, went to a conference with our data, and that was at SQL again in 2018, when we were kind of testing some of the data and how we interpreted that ended up in the book later on, and got some feedback. So as you can see, one thing that we really wanted to do is to bring this idea, our ideas, to our community to see if it's going to be useful for them, if it's going to add anything to the field, and if they're going to be interested later on in using the book. So all of those were positive to us. We'll see how it goes now that the book is about to come out. Now, what about the writing process? The writing process, this is how it kind of look like for us. So like I said, in October 2017 is when we signed our contract, and we got a deadline for December 2019 for our full draft to be due. What we've decided to do is, once we've outlined the whole book, and we already obviously knew how many chapters we're going to have because we had to have that in the book proposal, we've decided that each chapter will have a main author. And what that meant is that main author was responsible for writing basically majority of the chapter, and then the other two people would go in with revisions. And depends on the chapter. There were some chapters that went maybe through one or two rounds of revision, and that was it. There were some chapters that went, I don't even know how many revisions we've done on them. But I think that worked very well for us, because it, in a sense, in the amount of work on the book, it felt more like working on an article than working on this huge thing as a book on your own. Plus, I think it also allowed for a kind of a more cohesive vision for each chapter to be seen, and then the other people kind of either ask questions, edit more data, edit more explanations to it, and obviously use their turn for revisions to add more clarification and whatnot. Not the whole time, but probably about the last year or so, before we turned it in, we had weekly Zoom meetings, and those really helped us, because not only they kept us accountable, but also this was our time to clarify things, or like, I'm thinking in this chapter, I'm going to do this, what you guys think, before like putting a whole bunch of work and then hearing like, yeah, that doesn't work. We also had what I called middle editor. So obviously the editors at Routledge, they work with us, but they really just wanted the final draft and basically things mostly finished, so they can just work on the surface editing, but not really extensive revisions. So Susan got some money from Emory to pay one of our colleagues from UGA, who is also a linguist, and he knows our work pretty well, and his job is an editor. So it was a kind of perfect combination. And he would read our chapters when they were like mostly done, and he would read them, one, for surface level type of things and citations and stuff like that, but also he would read them for clarification, for cohesiveness, for kind of blending all of our voices together, because it was still three voices talking, but we didn't want this book to sound like three different people. We wanted to be a one cohesive voice throughout. So he worked with us on that extensively, and I think a large portion of how flowy this book is, and how one thing goes to another, really is contributed to his work on that. Another strategy that we did is what I call divide and conquer. So obviously we divided the chapters for main authors to be responsible for them, but then there's other things that have to be done about the book. And so, for example, Susan was responsible for getting all the permissions for images that we were using in the book. And it's a tedious kind of work, and not the most glamorous, but it needed to be done. So she was responsible for all of the chapters, so we didn't have to worry about it. I, for example, was responsible for putting basically the final versions for Routledge. So after our middle editor edited and we said, okay, this is done, this is good for Routledge, I will go in, make sure that the margins are fine, and took out the images and just leave indications where those figures should be put in, that the figures are correct sizing and whatnot. And also, Jennifer, for example, was responsible for, I would call it, putting in references. So many times in the book, we would say something about something that we think about, how this is interpreted, or this idea about perceptions and whatnot. And Jennifer in her comments would be like, we need a reference for this. And she was great at finding those because she just has tremendous memory for all the things that she's read. So she would be like, you know what, I read in this dude, this would work over here. So she would go in and put those references in that. So in that way, we had kind of used our skills into what we knew how to do, and we take care of for the whole book. So it made the process a little smoother. And the last little thing that we use that I think will work really well is a shared Dropbox folder, because we have totally avoided, email exchanges of like, here's draft number 1 and here's draft number 2, and I added revision to this. Instead, we just had, clearly organized Dropbox folder that we would just refer to it like, the next revision is in this folder. Go check it out. And I think that really helped us in clarity of where to find and what. Another kind of a maybe unexpected perk out of that shared Dropbox was when we were finding all kinds of different sources to use in the book. If they were digitally available, so like articles, sometimes ebooks and whatnot, we have one folder called readings, and we just put all of that stuff. So right now I have a little library of all the different researchers connected to specifically this topic that I'm working with, which is kind of great. So moving on to what is the book about? So I pulled this from our preface because I think that little paragraph kind of hits at the essence of the book. So what we said is, have you ever noticed how quickly you can make up your mind about who people are and what they are like, even though they have only spoken a few words to you? How is it that language can dictate what we think of others? This book as a whole presents a way for people to notice, examine, and question the role language plays in identifying, recognizing, and understanding those around them. And I think that was really throughout the book something that we were really focusing on, because our perceptions, our ideas, our beliefs about others that oftentimes are triggered by language, they're not just there. That's it. Oftentimes, what they are the base of how we react to other people and how we react and how we act in the world. And I think this is the part that is not explicitly enough seen in our daily life or talked about in our daily life for people to notice. So this is why we wanted to write this book, to really kind of point that out and allow not only for us but also for our readers to examine those beliefs. So, like I said, the metaphor that we used for that is the linguistic planet of belief. You have a little image of what we could imagine, in which every dot is some sort of a belief. It can be a linguistic belief, it can be belief about the speakers, about the world, and they are all kind of interconnected and put together. And we kind of add on those particles probably through a big chunk of our lives, with a lot of those entering our mind when we are pretty young and kind of moving into our unconsciousness. So we never really know fully why we think something about something or something about a person until we really stop for a moment, think about it, recognize it, and try to understand it, or sometimes maybe even change it. So here's our content. We ended up with 6 chapters. And in our first chapter called Concept of Belief, this is what probably in academic world we would just refer to as a lit review. chapter. So we've laid out all different disciplines that work on those ideas, because linguistics and perceptual dialectology is not the only discipline that works on it. We pulled in uh, um, voices from psychology, from sociology, from anthropology, from social linguistics to put it all together, because people look at the beliefs that we have and attitudes that we have from different angles, and they're not necessarily exclusive. I think they're bringing the complexity and bringing all the different aspects to it. We've also, this is also the chapter that we heavily explain the planets of belief and brought us this metaphor and how it applies to language. Now, in the second chapter, perceptual dialectology and the power of labeling, since the subfield of linguistics called perceptual dialectology is kind of our home for those ideas, we spend this chapter explaining, kind of giving us some history and explaining what it is, showcasing methods in perceptual dialectology, which is a subfield of linguistics that deals with perception. So what people think of other speech, and dialectology, because we use maps, right? So we give our respondents maps to draw on, to label, and then our results are also oftentimes displayed in forms of maps, right? We talk about power of labeling because this book is mostly focused on the labels that people put. So it's not only that they get a map of the US, they circle where the South is, but what are they writing about the South, right? Are they saying Southerners? Are they saying Hicks? Are they saying, good people? What are they saying in those labels, right? So that's what this chapter focused on. And the next three chapters were mostly data-driven chapters. So we've decided to talk about the planets and kind of zooming in. So we started with exploring planet USA. So this is data mostly based on national level maps that that respondents were given and were asked to draw where people speak in different ways. Then we moved on. We zoomed in into the south. So that's what we call southern planets. Here we have Hicks, Hillbillies, or Rednecks. Jennifer's research in Kentucky revealed this very interesting connection between those three terms when it comes to how people label Kentucky. So we brought in data from Kentucky, we brought in data from Tennessee, we brought data from Georgia to talk about how the Southerners see themselves and what are the planets about the South. And then local planets, the view from home, this is where we zoomed even more into a particular respondent. So on regional and national level, these are all congregated maps, right? So multiple people, we put them into one result map and we talk about trends. But in local planets, we explore specific respondents to see how much more variation there is the more we zoom in into the data. And then chapter 6, making sense out of our planets, is our conclusions, where we try to connect all of the ideas as we understand them and finish up the book. Now, so to continue on with that, I wanted to show you a few of the planets of beliefs or models or images that we've created. So you see on the, that would be top left corner, this is a national level planet of belief that we, or part of planet of belief that we propose, where you can see the south in big letters and north in the pretty big letters to indicate that they are very prominent in the data. And then you see some lines that connect to other ideas that oftentimes come together with it, right? So like Southern accent with the South, or country with the South, or where they talk about the North, they talk about Yankees, and they talk about talking fast. But you also see all those different tiny little dots that represent different types of beliefs that they have. So the linguistic ideas are not kind of in isolation, but they're all together with all the different types of beliefs that we have. You also see some kind of a gaps, and that refers to when it says I don't know, that refers to basically like northwestern, kind of in the middle part of the country, where a lot of our respondents literally would say, I don't know. Do people even live here? I have no idea how they talk. So there's kind of a gap, right, in those perceptions for America, for Southerners. And then there's ideas about California that are indicated not as prominent as the South and North, but there's some in there, right? So the data kind of shows us where our informants focus on. And underneath that, where you see standard and local and kind of Venn graphs, We see this is from regional. This is from regional level maps, where those two ideas are kind of interconnected, and we have various ideas about standard American English and local speech, right? Next to it, you also see what I've said before, that this idea that there is a relationship between the hillbilly and redneck, especially in Kentucky, but there's also some differences that they pointed out, and it seems like that the connecting part is the eastern Kentucky where Appalachian Mountains are, right? Right above it, where you see Southern and Standard and Educated and Friendly and Stupid and Home, you see a different, also regional level, but a different just visual representation of the planets, where again, through the lines and the thickness of the lines, we can see the stronger connections that we see, but also is, again, a lot of little dots around it, because just talking about language or even what we think of other people is not the only beliefs that those people carry. And in the top right corner, you see a local planet. So for one specific informant, leaf from Kentucky as well. And you can see that there are different big ideas, categories like geographical information or linguistic information or social information, and they're separated in some ways, but there are overlapping ideas, and being Southern seems to be the connecting parts. So we've proposed those types of images throughout the book to give, because our idea is not just for the metaphor to be in words, but also somewhat visual. So that's why we were trying to figure out how would we be able to show this. Obviously, we always run into the obstacle that actual planets are 3D, and we're working on paper, which is 2D. So we had to kind of figure out how to represent that best to showcase what we have. And here in our conclusion, I think, again, I pulled a paragraph that I think really represents best of where we got at the end, right? Because we started with an idea, we presented data, we interpreted the data, and then at the end, we were like trying to make sense out of it. So what we said is that our argument in the book then is that knowledge is power. A person has the power to change their beliefs about language simply by becoming more knowledgeable about both their own preconceived notions and about how language actually works. While we do not wish to overestimate the objectivity of people, as Carol cautions, we have learned through our research and teaching in the South that people need more information than they are getting with respect to language. People use these linguistic stereotypes in the real world with real people to varying degrees of success. This is what perceptual dialectology is about. And then comes a quote from Dennis Preston. And I think this is where we kind of initially started in our conversations about the book, but where we finally kind of settled as we work on that final chapter is that if only if we know about the beliefs and we talk about them and we make them explicit, we are in a position that we can at least consider changing them, especially those negative beliefs about speakers of different varieties, and maybe act on those changes and actually, react to people differently, think things about people differently. And that was kind of our big idea for the book that we presented in the conclusion. So the last question that I was thinking about is, what did I learn from this process? So first of all, collaboration is awesome, but it's also hard. It is absolutely awesome because you not only on practical level, so you have more data to talk about, so you can understand the topic better, show how more complex it is than maybe if you just think about your own data. But also you get to exchange ideas with people who understand what you're doing, and come up with ideas that probably you would not be able to, or at least not as fast, you would be able to come up on your own. And it also makes the task a little less daunting, knowing that there's other people doing it with you. So all of those are great for collaboration. I've collaborated before on research and publications and whatnot, so I wasn't new to it, and I wanted to do it. If I didn't want to write it with anybody, I wouldn't. But I did want to collaborate on that. Now it is hard, and on the kind of mundane type of level, it is hard because we have different schedules, we have different deadlines, we work differently. Some of us, have to write for an hour a day and do that. Some of us have to procrastinate and then just sit down for 2 days and just write. So figuring out those dynamics, that's always, there's some obstacles there. And also probably something that's hard, it's kind of hard and good at the same time, is that there are, like I said at the beginning, there are three voices speaking here, and all three voices add on something new to the topic, but the book needs to have one cohesive voice, and I think we've achieved that, but it's definitely something that we had to work really hard on as going through it. Another thing that I learned from this process that I think it was kind of initially already in my mind, but this really reinforced it, is that beliefs about language are everything, in the sense that when we speak to people, when we meet people, when we listen to people, we make up our mind based on many, many different cues and many, many different beliefs and stereotypes as well that we have. But language is that trigger for it so often. Not to mention that language is also where our thoughts are oftentimes wrapped in, right? So using one word to describe somebody versus a different word to describe somebody changes also our attitude into how we think of them. So in that sense, I think that language and beliefs connected to it are really everywhere we look. Um, Another thing that I learned is that patterns of beliefs are infinitely complex. When we started this journey, we were like, okay, we're just going to kind of make those things, and it's going to be pretty easy and clear, da da da. And then as we start working through it, every time we try to create those visualizations I just showed you, this is probably like iteration number 20 of those, right? Because we're like, well, what if we do it this way? What if we do this? Well, but then this doesn't account for this. This changes that. So we were really working with it and seeing it more and more and more as you get into data of how complex those are, right? Also, I think lastly, what I've learned is that, in a sense, I feel like my path as a researcher and research interest has been solidified because the ideas that I work with in the book, I'm already putting into new projects, and I want to explore more. And there's just so many more questions that came out of it, and I think that very easily might be the path that I'll just take on for the rest of my career. Okay, this is where I wanted to end. So thank you so much for